I wouldn't want to take too much of your time and to grant the floor to Anne, our last but bright sparkle of the day. So Anne is a member of the advisory board as well. She's the CEO of the Audience Agency, whom you might have heard about, which is the UK charity for public engagement with culture and a unique national data analytics service. And Anne's long-term commitment is improving the practice and advocating for change in the cultural sector towards an audience-centered approach in policy and practice. So as we have seen in a lot of the aspects that you've touched upon, the Museum of Future have audiences at the heart of the endeavor. So I think it makes total sense for us to end the day with Anne's input. So if I may, Anne, the stage is yours, and we're really ready to hear your inspiration talk, your impulse talk.
Well, thank you very much, Olga. I'm very aware that today's been quite a long, intense day for everybody. So I will try and keep this short, and I will try and not talk too quickly in my enthusiasm to keep it short. And everybody who knows me knows I have a tendency to talk too quickly. So I'm going to just open the chat again now, partly because I have a question for you. But also I'm going to, if I'm talking too quickly or I'm making no sense, just let me know. And I can see Olga and I can see Veronica, and they can tell me as well. So make faces at me if I'm talking to you. Anyway, so without more ado, I can see that I am going to be preaching my own views and passions to the converted, because I've just seen those most beautiful use of Jamboards I've ever seen. So that's just amazing. I'm really inspired. Fantastic. I want to see, can I have some copies, please, to show people what you can do? But also really music to my ears to hear you talking about the place of audiences and the issues of inclusion. So as I say, nothing new here, but just some thoughts in a way to share. So I'm going to use a few slides just to help make my comments make sense. So just bear with me while I screen share. I think it's that one. Can you see that okay? So this is called an impulse talk. And I thought, Olga, that gave me carte blanche just to talk about anything I wanted to. So I wanted to talk a little bit about audience focus, what it means and how to do it, as I say. And I know that I have a lot of other experts in the room here. So please just use this as an opportunity to respond or to start other conversations. So why does this notion of audience focus matter? I mean, I think you've put it brilliantly in those Jamboards that I just saw there. But of course, we often talk about the fact that audience focus is, of course, about best use of resources, about using our time, money and effort efficiently, about increasing the impacts that we talk about. For me, it's also really practically geared towards the processes by which we advance inclusivity and those concepts of universal access that you've just all spoken about quite eloquently.
And sorry to interrupt, we still see the first slide.
Do you?
Yes.
Better? Can you see it again?
Perfect. Yes, now we see it. Why does it matter?
Why does it matter?
Yes.
There we go. It's good, it's useful. It's about impact, but also I guess you know, ultimately audience focus, if we talk about our purpose in the world, ultimately that is about our users. And if we can try to reorient ourselves around their needs rather than our own, we will be better at achieving our overall meaning and purpose, it seems to me. So for me, this notion of audience focus is a lot about changing the way in which we think and plan about things. But I'm going to just stop for a moment and ask you, if I had to ask you this question, what does audience focus mean to you? Could you just drop a word or two into the chat? I know you've been interacting a lot today. You thought, oh, thank God, it's finished. We can stop interacting. But if I asked you in one word, what does audience focus mean to you? Does anybody have any thoughts for me? Oh, look. Oh, you're getting really quick now. Yeah, loving that. Can you everybody see that? This is brilliant. Interaction, engagement, inclusivity, engagement, easy to understand, two-way communication. We have to actually hear what a visitor is saying to us, empathy, diverse, for and from, for them, participation, visitor research, dialogue, visitor vision, conversation, emotional connection, feedback, empathy, diversity, participation with, honesty, transparency, dialogue, for conversation, data, creative dimension, communication, simple feedback, participation, ideas, and I think there are more. Well, I am glad to know that I am fully aligned with all of you and working together there. So you will feel comfort and you will feel little discord, I think, with what I'm about to say about that. Fantastic. Thank you for doing that. So I've tried to put all of it on one slide, which is always a bad idea, but let's have a go. So for me, yeah, really this notion of audience focus is about the reorientation of the way we think about our work as organizations, really. So it is to some extent an organizational function where we are thinking about perhaps changing the way we look through the telescope and putting our audiences and communities absolutely first in our thinking, less about here's some good ideas we've had, let's see if we can find an audience for them, and more about who are our audiences, who's our community, and what do they need for us. I think it's implicit in what you all just said that we're aligned about that. For my money, though, what does that mean that we have to do? So for me, that is all about being curious. It is audience focus comes along in the kit comes the idea that we must also be curious, and we have to love both actual hard data, and I think we have to love conversations with our users and audiences. We need to love the mixture between the quantitative understanding of what's going on and a qualitative understanding. So being curious, and that curiosity fed by real data. And I think you have to love data in a good way. Of course, we know data is a good thing. I think that also means that we don't just have to pay attention to what people tell us. I think we have to take inspiration from it. And for me, there's a real step change there. But if we see data as being the unlocking key for creativity, I think that really changes how we feel about it. So a lot of my thinking has been, how do we reimagine data? And everyone's shoulders drop a bit and go, yes, I know data is very important. I just don't love it and I don't care about it very much. I know it's important. To turning it around to go, bring me the data. I need the inspiration from the data. That's where I'm coming from. Not always successfully, but there you go. That's our intention. So for me, again, this notion of taking inspiration from what our visitors say and do, but also acting on that evidence. But it's not just about, I think this conversation about data-driven or evidence-driven is great, but in reality, I think we need to accept that evidence is a massively important ingredient. It may be the super spice in our ingredient, but we also need our experience as practitioners and instinct. So it's evidence as a pepper or a spice in the mix that feels to me really, really important. So we shouldn't downplay the importance of our professional experience, but we need to be ready and confident to use that data and evidence when it comes at us. So for me, there's also something about understanding audiences from a point of view of a total experience. So seeing, in a very practical way, remembering that audiences are on a journey. They're on a journey once they have contact with us. But there's a lot of journey that happens before and after any contact they may have with us in a digital or physical space. But actually, the meaning that we bring to audiences is very broad, and we need to understand it in that concept. So from a practical point of view, that notion of visitor journey mapping and understanding what we're doing in the journey and how we can influence and how we can make it better is also super important from a pragmatic, concrete sense. I think that because the notion of audience focus is to some extent about change, about doing things differently, about reorientation, as I've said several times, for me, that being experimental and being a confident experimenter is also a key concept in being audience focused. Now, for me, the difference between doing new things and being experimental is that you probably have a strong hypothesis that you want to test, but most importantly, doing new things and collecting data about them is what changes it from doing many new things like a headless chicken, as we say in English, and being genuinely experimental. So for me, again, that's another idea that's very important. And I suppose linked to that, the idea that we iterate with our audiences, test again. This is I'm preaching, I know, entirely to the converted on that one. And you all beautifully said it in the chat there, and I'll say it again, that I think this notion that it's become very important to us, hasn't it? The idea that we are innovating and making change with our users definitely not to our users as passive objects, or perhaps even for. I mean, I think this concept of with, co-creative, co-curational has become much more important in a redefining what we might be by audience focus, especially when we're talking about reaching people who are not already converted and thrilled and enthralled by what we do. Certainly working with on new experiences, new ways of working becomes enormously important, and there's a lot of evidence on that to that effect, of course. So finally, I also think that as well as being collaborative with our visitors, something that I really notice in organisations that are genuinely audience focused is their ability to be collaborative with others as well. So I think somebody again put it in the chat, you know, this idea about being naturally, innately, not just curious, but collaborative, willing to work with others, open to the many ideas that are coming from people you might consider to be your competitors or your people outside your organisation. But this notion of generosity and generativeness, I think, comes along with the concept of audience focus. It's important to be outward looking and naturally collaborative. I think that comes, those skills are the ones that really help us to be audience focused on. So finally, if I was going to talk about some of the practical applications, for me, this would be a lot about thinking like a designer, or particularly thinking like a human-centered designer. And I know many of you will be designers and design experts, so I'm going to just totally preach the converted and just give you a bit of a take on my thoughts about that just to finish off here. This is probably a little bit longer as a presentation than we've got in the next 5 to 10 minutes. Yeah, Victoria, Veronica, it's okay, I can see, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to skip through some of this and share, and we'll be doing some other things. I'll come back to some of these ideas later on, I have no doubt. So thinking like a human-centered designer. I'm going to skip the next 2 slides, but for those of you who like models, another way of thinking about audience focus is this notion of, we could define audience focus as being the difference between single loop learning. We set off to do something, we see how well we do it, and then we do it again, how we do it, focus on how we do it and what we do, and thinking much more about the why we do. So this notion that single loop learning, where you sort of just, you know, you do it, you hope the best, it's working, you see whether or not enough people are coming, and you keep on doing it without ever asking why we do these things the way we do it. Are we doing it in a way that makes sense to our users and audiences, which we would think as being double loop learning. This rather famous Arguson-Schoen model, which I think is a really useful, straightforward conceptual model to try and sum the whole thing up. You're really spending time getting to understand what difference we're making, why we do the things we do, what difference they're making for people. So, you know, instead, single loop learning is informed by getting proof of what we thought we already knew, whereas double loop learning is all about, you know, hearing the many, being more pluralistic in the way that we work and open to new ideas and ways of seeing. Single loop, you know, we have inferences, we have our assumptions, and we work all the time on those assumptions. We don't challenge them. In double loop learning, we're really including the voice of our users to challenge the things that we thought we knew. And this kind of, as a single concept for me, that's what underlines audience focus. So coming back to this idea, so how do we move on from knowing that that's what we need to do to actually doing it? And for me, this is really helpful to think like a designer. Now, I'm sure that many of you are designers and know all about design thinking, but just to make sure we're on the same page, you will also know that there are as many definitions of design thinking as there are probably fruits in the world. So, but here's one: a non-linear iterative process that teams use to, I can't read the rest of that quote, but I think you can, challenge assumptions, redefine problems, and create innovative solutions to prototype and test. So all concepts in one sentence. So we'll recognise that. So for me, also, I really, really love the double diamond, and I'm sure you're very, very aware of it. I can see some people nodding, it's like, yeah, we know all about that. But, you know, actually, this idea, if we want to get away from the old school, I've had a great idea, let's go and find someone who will like, let's find some visitors who will like this idea, or I've had a great idea, let's find some users who are going to engage with it. You know, I do really think that the rigor of the double diamond process is incredibly important. This idea that we do the divergent thinking, the first part of the first diamond to understand the problem definition. We spend a lot of time understanding what the problem is. The convergent thinking, choosing what things are most important to form that first of the design, get to the design brief, as I know we're all doing. And then, you know, again, trying things out in a prototyping. You know, I think in the olden days when we were less digitally enabled, it was much harder to think about prototyping and testing in a very live, agile way, but it's much easier now, of course, as you know, before we go out there with the final project. Now, I know we all know this, but I think it's just worth reminding ourselves that this is the fundamental process, really, of audience focus. So let's move on. I think we've done enough about that. And of course, it's not just about design thinking. This is about the switch from expert-led design to user-centered design. And that is, you know, I mean, again, it's kind of easy to, it's so easy to say, it's easy to understand, but I think it's actually more difficult to do in the first instance. So we really have to engage with our users, and we have to do it in lots of different ways. For me, that's always the picture I have in my head all the time when I think to myself, oh, I'm just skipping the piece of talking with my users. So many of you will be aware of the IDEO design thinking process, this notion of sort of empathize and define need in the first problem space, and then ideation, again, around divergent thinking, prototyping and testing and so on. And we've done quite a lot of work at the Audience Agency at trying to turn this into a program to help organizations just use a design thinking model in the way they think about everything they do, including how they might be developing their digital competencies as well. So we've done, you know, some of our programs have been based on this idea that, you know, you spend time within your organization doing some divergent and convergent thinking around what's our audience problem before moving on to talking to audiences about what their problems with us are, and that we do this in a very conscious and organization kind of wide way. And I just wanted to share with you. So in fact, we've turned this into a very particular program, which is part of another EU-funded project which is just coming to an end now. And we've got a whole bunch of tools and kind of a blueprint for this process that is all up online and just recently put there, which you may or may not find useful. Some of it will be totally very, very well known to you and of no use whatsoever. But what I think is interesting about this project is that we have tested this process with over 50 organizations. And I just want to share with you last thoughts about what they have found most useful in their overall journey of using design thinking. The first thing has been around building empathy, and so quite a few people said that empathy was a key point for them in this notion of audience focus. And I think that's absolutely right. So getting beyond the data to really put yourself in other people's shoes and to use that empathy as the inspiration for what we're doing. This was really a revelation for a lot of our users, that you could bring emotion and empathy to what you were doing beyond the kind of stats and data. So this mix, again, what that means is you need two kinds of data. You do need the quantitative behavioural stuff, but you also need the qualitative information as well. But we also found that a great deal of empathy came from, important point for this project, working collaboratively with others. So I think this is a great, you know, I think this project is brilliant because it is all about building empathy within and without. So I think there's a lot of stuff around, you know, using generic research, moving on to using specific research, having conversations, but importantly, bringing it all together meaningfully and keeping going. So we used a lot of, you know, we used a lot of exercises like the empathy, you know, persona canvas, but ways of bringing together data we had into coherent models that meant that we could think about data from an empathetic point of view and share that with others in our organizations. So top tip there. This idea of really being focused around divergent and convergent thinking, and people found this very useful. They knew that they were doing it anyway, but being very conscious about where you were in your design process. Organizations found this super, super useful. Prototyping, doing it really well. As I say, you guys will know a lot about this. This whole project is about prototyping, but this was transformative for many organizations, that they could actually think about everything they did as being, you know, every new thing you do can be a prototype. So I think there's something for me about the process you guys are going to go through, which is fantastic organizational learning in general. And finally, really important thing was that this way of working was very much about working in collaborative groups. And this is something that I would really say to you in your projects. You know, try and make sure that what you're doing brings together lots of people across your museum organization, because this was one of the most fundamental changes that this project brought about, was getting the creativity of lots of different people within the organization to help design those experiences. So super important, and I would really encourage you in some way to make sure that that is built into your model. Right, so good luck. Have a lovely time. Can't wait to find out what's going to happen. Two thoughts for you, two little quotes that I rather like there, but I'm not going to read them out. I shall leave those for you. And I see that we've got just a couple of minutes to finish. So thank you very much for listening to me. I'm so privileged and honoured to be part of the advisory group, and I can't wait. Thank you, guys.